everybody. All right, so I am not a morning person. I am very grateful that I did not have that 8:30 slot. I'm the type of person who actually, especially in the winter and in the morning, kind of struggles with my mood and my energy levels. And so it wasn't all that surprising when a few years ago now I woke up on a December morning. It was a Monday. It was rainy and snowy outside, both because it's Ohio. And I woke up with a sore throat and I was just completely wiped out. And I'd been traveling that previous weekend, so I kind of chalked it up to the travel and figured I was fine and I could power through this little sore throat when I went to work. So I went to work, and as the day progressed, I started feeling worse and worse and worse. And by the next day, I went home, and I was getting ready to go to work, realized I had a fever, and was like, I just can't do this. So I text my boss, and I tell him, hey, I'm not coming into work today. I'm not feeling well. And he's like, okay, take the day off. So my day off, instead of resting, it turned into me literally laying on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, answering emails and Slack messages, and doing some document editing. And this kind of cycle went on. The next day I had a big meeting, so I had to be at work the next day. And for basically the entire month of December a couple years ago, I would go through this cycle where I woke up and I didn't feel good, but I had so much to do at work, and I was so stressed out with everything going on that I would show up to work. I'd work for a couple days, get sicker, stay home for a day, not really rest, not really take care of myself. And after a full month of this, what had started as a little sore throat had evolved into bronchitis and strep throat. I was a week out from delivering a 4-hour workshop, and I had no voice, and I was on a steady dose of steroids and antibiotics and just not taking care of myself. And one thing that really stuck out to me that month is, I know we have a lot of Columbus natives here, but that year there was a big holiday party with a lot of the Columbus user groups. And I remember going to this party. It's 300 people, there's a live band, it's supposed to be a big party, and I had so many conversations with people that day who were talking about how their throats hurt, or they're tired, or they're losing their voice, or they're coughing and they're worn down. And I'm like, we're at a party, we're supposed to be having fun, and everybody's just talking about how miserable they feel. And so I think about health a lot. I've supported people through a number of health issues, everything from a friend who had a brain tumor to a family member who was in a psychiatric ward at one point. And so health is kind of always somewhere in my mind, but going to that party and hearing at a party everybody talking about how miserable they were, but they were at this party because they felt like they had to be, it kind of made me want to make a change. So I go into the new year like you do, and I vow to take better care of myself. And I decided also that I wanted to help others know it was okay to discuss their health issues and bring some of these conversations into the open. So January, going to the new year, going to take care of myself, going to get back on track with exercise, going to prioritize rest and myself a little bit more. And then it's a late January morning. I'm sitting at my desk chugging coffee because I hadn't slept much the night before. And I have this just onslaught of texts and phone calls coming in. I cannot get the red badges on Outlook and Slack to go away. My social media is blowing up. And people are stopping by my desk every few minutes asking for, I need this report, I need this paperwork, did you take care of that yet? Oh wait, this is the new priority. And I couldn't get anything done because every time I would start on a task, somebody would come interrupt me with something that was more urgent and more important. So in the midst of it, I had a frustrated text exchange with a friend who also works for a tech company, and they were also having a really stressful day. So this was, in case you can't read it, I was having just one of those days. And I threatened to quit my job and just leave everything behind because people were exhausting me, which doesn't happen. Normally I'm an extrovert. Normally I'm somebody who thrives on interacting with people. I get energy from other people. And that day it was too much, and that day I realized that something was really wrong when the thing I love most, which is being around and helping people, was no longer a thing I wanted to do. So that kind of made me redouble my efforts and think about, first of all, how did I get to that point? And then kind of start focusing on my health from there. And so what led me to that point? I was living a pretty sedentary lifestyle. I wasn't taking time to walk around. I wasn't even walking my dog as much as I should have. I'd completely abandoned my running habit. I was just sitting at my desk all day and then all evening. I had way too many demands on my time. I was doing my day job. I was writing a new conference talk. I was taking care of house chores and, like friends and family and other important things, trying to keep my relationships going with them. I was in a super high stress environment. At the time I was a tech recruiter, we were in the midst of a big hiring push. We were behind on a project, and I had a couple colleagues that I was supporting through some health issues. And then people just constantly needed things from me. And because I wasn't making the time for myself, my diet looked a lot like that. I was quickly, living on a diet of user group pizza and like happy hour appetizers and granola bars I could eat at my desk. So does this sound familiar? Yes. We've come to a point where this is kind of normal and this is expected, and this should not be normal. We should not sacrifice our happiness and our health and our families and our relationships for the sake of our work, our money, or our success. There's nothing wrong with being passionate about your work. Absolutely nothing with even dedicating some long hours to your work sometimes. And there's not something entirely wrong with being stressed out, but if that's become your entire way of life, where you're doing nothing but living, breathing, eating, and sleeping work, and you're stressed out of the time, this is not sustainable long term. And we don't have to sacrifice our physical or our mental health for the sake of our jobs. Before I go a little bit further, I have to give you kind of the standard disclaimers. I am not a doctor. I am a law school dropout. I am not a health expert or a guru in any way. I am one of my things didn't show up, but anyway, I'm currently a product owner for a software consulting company called AWH. It's day 5 of my job, and thank you. And in a fun twist, a lot of our work focuses on healthcare and nonprofit applications, things that make people's lives better, so that was a nice little plus. Community advocate, I'm very excited about our technology community, about bringing people together, about supporting it. And I do have ADHD. I was diagnosed with that in my mid-20s, and about 2 years ago, I got the fun dual diagnosis of anxiety and depression. And so it was kind of ironic, because I was writing this talk at the time I was going through some of my treatment for this. And above all that, I am a firm believer that if we as technical professionals don't talk about our health issues, we're never going to resolve them, and our industry will continue to be unhealthy. But I'm not just saying this because I want to take a break sometimes. At a high level, when we don't take care of ourselves, it affects us physically. Weight gain, lowered immunity, aches and pains, even things like your shoulders hurt from sitting crunched at your desks for too long, missed work, or showing up to work but not working up to your full potential. Mentally, unhealthy habits can make us feel hopeless. They can add to the stress that we're already experiencing. We can actually shut down. I have friends who, when they are at their most mentally unhealthy, they shut down and hide from other people and don't interact. And you can resort to destructive acts. And when we're feeling like this, we can't write as quality of code. We can't create the designs we're trying to create. We can't run the meetings we're trying to run. We don't communicate effectively. We can't let our teams and our clients and our coworkers down. More importantly, when this happens, we let our friends and our family down. It's really hard to take care of other people and nurture other relationships if you're not taking care of yourself. And aside from that, there's research to back this up. Not taking care of ourselves can cause what are called chronic diseases. And chronic diseases are things like cancer and type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. Centers for Disease Control, 70% of deaths are due to chronic diseases. 86% of our national health care costs are due to chronic disease, and this is the one that always gets me. Chronic diseases are some of the most preventable diseases that are out there. There are ways that you can prevent or even maybe sometimes delay the onset of certain chronic diseases. So we can do things that affect and make ourselves healthier. But neglecting your health, it also doesn't make you feel sicker. It also actually impacts your team negatively. I know I talked about kind of trying to go to work when I was sick, and I know full well that when I was sick and hopped up on Dayquil and coffee, I wasn't focusing well. I wasn't doing things well. I was just not being a very good employee. And I would make mistakes. I dropped a lot of balls that month that I was trying to do stuff. My productivity was lower. Morale can be lower as well. If you're somebody who's sick all of the time, sometimes you come off maybe as a little bit negative and a little bit less pleasant of a person to be around, and unfortunately that can affect the rest of your team. And everybody has those days where you have a headache, you have a slight cold, whatever, but if you're constantly chronically ill, it can be hard to work with you as a team member. And if you are being less productive and your morale isn't as good and your performance isn't as good, you don't grow your career as well. So we all kind of know the tips for including physical health, right? Everybody likes to talk about eat healthier food and do some more exercise. And these are two very important things. The third one is something that we like to kind of ignore and discourage, and that's sleeping. This is the third really important component to your physical health. Consistently making an effort to eat better food, be more active, and get more sleep is the best thing you can do for your health. And the cool thing is this doesn't have to be a big action. You don't have to decide, I'm going to go gluten-free vegan and train for a marathon and sleep 10 hours a night. Like, you don't have to make all of these drastic changes. So instead, I'm going to focus on kind of small, consistent daily changes you can make to improve your overall physical health. First of all, I love this quote from Michael Pollan in Defense of Food. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. One of my biggest pet peeves is, and marketers are extremely guilty of this, is labeling foods as good or evil. That sinful chocolate cake and that sinless ice cream. Like, there's an ice cream brand out now called Halo Top, and I'm like, it's ice cream, it doesn't have morality, it's food. Food is delicious. It is something we should enjoy with our friends. It is not good or evil. The problem comes, of course, when we eat too many of the wrong things. And I've now worked at a couple different consulting companies where, like most consulting companies, we have all of the snacks. At one point, I worked at a company that hosted 12 user groups a year, and so we had snacks, beer, pop, a selection that would rival most convenience stores in the office at any given time. And then I tend to have jobs where I tend to be really having to be social, so there's a lot of happy hours. So if I'm not careful and I'm not paying attention, my lunch becomes user group pizza and maybe a mini Snickers with a Coke Zero, and then my dinner is boneless wings and vodka. Those are all good things, and I like to enjoy them sometimes. As a matter of fact, one time I was giving this talk, and 3 hours later I'm standing at happy hour with a mini slider and a margarita, and somebody comes up to me and tells me how much they loved my health talk. And I was like, that moderation thing, it was just a funny moment, 3 hours later. So what can we do to help this? You can order healthier snacks and foods. So what I did at one point, I was in charge of ordering the food for our user groups, and so I started ordering a salad alongside the pizza. And my one coworker was actually kind of giving me crap about it. He's like, nobody's going to eat the salad. And it turned out that not only were people eating salad, people were requesting that I order the salad just so they could have something other than pizza. And then strike for a balance at meals. Sometimes I eat the cheeseburger, but I get a vegetable on the side instead of the French fries. Like, there's just little swaps you can make. And as far as happy hours go, there's ways that you can handle happy hours a little bit more healthily. One trick that I do is I will drink just plain soda water with a lime in it. After I've had a drink, I'll kind of go back and forth. Or, just find something else that you can drink that's not necessarily alcohol. Now, if you're a user group leader and you would like your sponsoring companies to order healthier food, feel free to reach out and say, hey, can we have a couple healthier options? Or can we have a vegetable alongside whatever the main is? Same thing if you're an employee. Talk to your employers and find out if they'll order healthier food. What I wound up doing is at the place that had all of the candy and chips and pop and beer, we started ordering also things like string cheese and fruit, and we did beef jerky because some people were low carb. So we had an assortment of snacks so people had options as to what they wanted to eat as far as snacks go. Some other tricks, if you're the type of person who brings or buys your lunch every day, I have some tips on that. I know people who love meal prep. I know people who do this weekend meal prep thing, and they post these beautiful Instagram pictures of their roasted chicken, and that's awesome, and if that works for you, do that. Just find what works for you to make it easier to eat more healthily. I have recently started doing meal services. I was doing, what was I doing for a minute? I was doing HelloFresh for a minute, and I've switched to something called Hungry Root now that I'm experimenting with, and the healthy food comes to my house, so I just have to make it. And then I'm not tempted to order Uber Eats or whatever I would, or eat pizza or, nuke something from the microwave. So it kind of makes healthier eating easier. And then get away from your desk sometimes for lunch. Get away from your desk. At one point we did, on Fridays at a company I worked at, we did board game lunch. And it was great. We would take an hour at lunchtime on Fridays. We would sit and play board games. We'd play something lightweight, like maybe Exploding Kittens or something like that. And it was less about the game, but more about a way to get together with your team and hang out and have fun at work. And then you would return to the afternoon a lot more refreshed than if you just powered through lunch and worked. Now, this is me. I am very good about going to sleep with great plans to wake up at 6 a.m. I'm going to wake up, I'm going to work out, I'm going to go running, I'm going to cross-train, and the following morning goes one of two ways. I sleep in, and I just have a horrible start to my day. I sleep in, I hit the snooze button a bunch of times, I'm groggy, and by the time I actually get out of bed, get my dog taken care of, and get out the door, I'm running late. So I'm cursing every stoplight that I run into, and I'm like running into the office 2 minutes before stand-up, and I'm just stressed out all day. The days that I exercise, I hate myself for the first 20 minutes I'm awake. I think it's the stupidest thing ever. But I put on some music, I do my exercise, and by the end, all those little endorphins kick in. I keep my music going all morning, and I just wind up starting my day feeling a lot happier, a lot less stressed out. Thing is, that's hard to remember at 6 a.m. when the alarm goes off. So, and sometimes I don't get in a workout because of scheduling. I'm lazy, I'm sick. Last year I was dealing with some treatment for my depression and anxiety and going through a lot of other personal challenges, and so kind of my exercise kind of got put by the wayside. But I did still try to do little things to incorporate activity into my day. So I love my Fitbit. I like to do things like take stairs, park farther away, make sure I get my 10,000 steps most days. You know, stand up and stretch even at your desk. Every hour, stand up and stretch and move around. Something so that you're not so sedentary all the time. And the other trick that works really well for me is I treat my workouts like I would any other meeting. So I will schedule them into my calendar, and I will work out. And then sleep. We love bragging about how little sleep we get. We read these articles by entrepreneurs who brag about how they only sleep 3 hours a night. It almost becomes a point of pride that we sacrifice our sleep so much. It's something that's easier to sacrifice when we feel pressure to get everything done. And we figure we can drink some coffee and drink an energy drink and be fine and power through. And you can do that for a little bit, but the problem is we actually need sleep. And I'm not just saying that because my bed is comfortable and I like to sleep. Science. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, a lot of research says that sleep is important. It helps your brain function. It helps you process and remember information. So, you know, sometimes you might go to sleep with a problem on your mind and you wake up and you've solved that problem. That's because while you were sleeping, your brain was processing all of the information you'd taken in throughout the day. It allows the body to heal. Things like your heart and your blood vessels and other cells actually get replenished while you're sleeping, and this also increases immunity. Sleep helps balance the hormones, specifically the hormones that control hunger and blood sugar. And we're actually safer and more productive when we're sleeping. The U.S. National Institute of Health, sleep deprivation increases your risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, and depression. Remember those chronic diseases I was talking about? A lot of those are the same. Diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure. Some of these that are possibly preventable. So how do you get better sleep? The conventional wisdom is to keep a schedule, go to sleep and wake up at the same time every single day. If you're the type of person whose life and schedule is consistent enough to do that. For me, because I have days where I need to be doing work stuff at 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. and I have some long days and kind of a wacky schedule, I'm less worried about getting a schedule and more about knowing how many hours of sleep I need. So I know that I need 7 hours of sleep most night, and I try to prioritize that. And I let myself know it's okay to go to sleep. The world is not going to stop because I'm asleep. No bright lights before bed. Sleep hygiene is a big thing. No TV, no iPad, no phone, no computer. The spectrum of light emitted by our screens actually triggers to our brains that it's still time to be awake. Keep your bedroom as dark and quiet, as comfortable and cool as possible. So for me, what this looks like is I will mostly put my phone away at the end of the night, and I'll read on my Kindle, which isn't backlit. I'll play with my dog. I like to do challenging Lego kits, so I'll find something that's not a screen to wind down at the end of the night. And then limit or avoid alcohol, caffeine, and big meals later in the day. Like I said, for me, I prioritize my sleep because I know that if I don't get enough sleep for more than a few days, I will be burnt out. Full disclosure, I'm on 5 hours of sleep for the second day in a row. I know tonight I need to get adequate rest or I'm not going to be feeling well by tomorrow. I also know that I'm an extrovert, so I know that for me personally, I need wind down time. So if I need to be asleep at 11 o'clock, I need to leave the event at 10 o'clock and get my energy out. and stop talking to people, because as long as I'm talking to people, I'll keep going. So know that about yourself too. Know what energizes and makes you sleepy. I've also had good luck with some sleep meditation apps or just playing soft ambient music while I'm sleeping. So taking the time to improve our diet and our exercise and sleep, this actually helps fix some career-related problems. You're more productive, you're a little bit more rested, you're a little bit more active, your body's running a little bit better because you're eating a little bit healthier. Your morale is better when you feel good physically, mentally, and your mood feels better. And that's going to help you grow professionally. But taking care of physical health isn't enough. There's an additional aspect of our health that's often ignored, whispered about, and it's mental health. And physical and mental health affect each other directly. Physical health issues can increase the risk of mental health and relationship problems. They can make depression or anxiety worse. I know somebody who, she has both fibromyalgia and depression, and those things definitely feed into each other. When she's physically in pain, her moods are even lower, and that just cycles into more pain. Mental health issues cause a risk and cause problems with your physical health, as well as can cause relationship problems. This is something that I've unfortunately dealt with in my life, as my depression caused some problems in a very important relationship, but we went through it. These things affect, mental health affects your human behaviors and interactions. If you're anxious, if you're depressed, it's going to affect how you interact with other people. And the interesting example that I come to about this is stress. Because when you're stressed out, we generally think of it as a brain thing. You can't cope, you can't think. But your body also has a physical response to stress. Your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up. And if you are chronically stressed, it actually causes more immune issues. So it's interesting to me to see how stress, which is kind of a brain or a mood thing, actually affects you physically as well. And just like our bodies can become ill, so can our minds. 1 in 5 American adults has a mental illness. If there are 5 people on your team, there's a good chance that one of those people has mental illness. And this stat goes up even more. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this group later, but there's a study that's been done on technology professionals, and within the tech industry, the stat's something more like 35% of adults in health have a mental illness. Anecdotally, I feel like that's probably accurate given a lot of people I've talked to and what I know, conversations I've had. So what is a mental illness? American Psychiatric Association. It affects the way you think, you behave, or you feel. This one's key, the same diagnosis with different experiences. So the example I always come back to is depression. I know people who, 3 people could have depression. This person, when they have depression, wants to eat all the things. This person doesn't have any appetite. This person who's depressed wants to shut up inside of themselves. This person who's depressed wants to do anything but stay in the house. There's different ways that the same diagnosis manifests itself. The causes are all over the place. There's genetics and biochemistry. I personally have a genetic predisposition to some of the issues I have because I have a long family history of those issues. There are also life events in your environment that can trigger or worsen those things. The important thing, though, is that recovery is possible. You can recover from mental illness. Maybe not fully. In a lot of cases, you can recover fully, but you can at least get the appropriate treatment and be able to live a good life. So why does this matter? 10.2 million adults have mental health and addiction disorders. Depression is a leading cause of disability worldwide. 60% of adults with a mental illness didn't get help in the last year, and that's white adults. Those stats go even higher if you look at other minority populations. And more importantly, if you're somebody who suffers, you might be struggling at work. If you have team members who are struggling, there are ways to support them. But in order to do that, we need to acknowledge, treat, and understand mental illness. Talk a little bit more about how your mental health impacts you as a team member. When you're paralyzed by depression or dwelling on the lies your anxiety brain tells you, it's difficult to focus. It's difficult to follow through on tasks. I know that this has affected my performance at times at work, and I was fortunately able to overcome it, but it's a thing to be aware of. Your moods and your emotions can obviously filter onto other people and influence them. And if you're less productive and your morale is lower, your professional growth is lower. Now, what's interesting is the impacts of poor mental health, same as the impacts of poor physical health. You cannot separate these 2 types of health. So how do you treat mental health? How do you treat, how do you get a diagnosis? So for me, I noticed that I was getting to a point where I always kind of struggled with the winter. I always went into kind of a dark place. I had a hard time. But at some point I realized that it wasn't at a point anymore where I could do yoga or go for a run or somehow otherwise get myself out of a depressed funk. And fortunately, I had a family who was very open about these things, so I could recognize that I was on a path where I needed to get professional help because I couldn't just vitamin D and run myself out of depression. So what do you do? First of all, you look for the signs of mental illness. Some of them are excessive worrying, frequent mood swings, trouble at work, trouble communicating, avoiding social situations, changes in biological habits, and substance abuse. Now, what's interesting about these is that a lot of these are aspects of our daily life. We all have days we have trouble doing work. Nobody's mood is the same all the time. So the trick is to kind of tell when these are parts of your daily life versus getting to a point where they're impacting you. And when I realized that I was sad every single day to the point of not wanting to get out of bed, I knew that it was more than just a funk and I needed to get some help. So hopefully you have loved ones and friends and family members who can help watch for these changes in you, and if not, at least kind of be aware of yourself and your moods and your triggers. So I get a diagnosis, I go to my doctor. My doctor says, yeah, you have depression and anxiety. And I said, okay. I was like, why is it? He said, genetics are fun, and you've been going through a stressful time. I said, okay. So I got my diagnosis. I started looking into and teaching myself about what does depression mean and how do you treat it, how do you overcome it, how do you get through it at work. I was prescribed a medication. Unfortunately, the first medication I was on, I had some very bad side effects to the point where my doctor will not let me take that whole class of medications. I got lucky in that the second antidepressant they tried me on works really well. And I just started that back in the fall, and I feel like it was the final little thing I needed to tweak myself to feel more like myself than I have in years. But you get some medicine. And the tricky thing with psych meds is it takes 4 to 6 weeks to know whether they're working. The side effects can suck, so you really have to be patient and have support as you're going through that. Therapy. I go to therapy. I've been stepped down from every week to every other week. I go to therapy every other week. I don't miss it. Sometimes my therapist gives me tools and things to cope, and sometimes she's just somebody to listen to, and her whole job is just to listen to me and not be judgmental, and that can be helpful too, especially as I've been going through this job search that I was going through. It was nice to have somebody to go talk to that wasn't going to give me advice, that wasn't going to try to guide me in a professional way, but just kind of be supportive and encourage me. And you learn how to change your behaviors or coping techniques. And you need to have a support system. This is so key, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. Now, what's interesting is a few years ago, I had a coworker who broke her ankle. I had a coworker who was diagnosed with depression. These two both had their health issues come up around the same time, and they both went through the same process. They got diagnosed, they learned about the condition, they both were prescribed medication, they both had, albeit different types of therapy, but therapy, had to change their behaviors. And what struck me as these coworkers were going through that is everybody wanted to know how the girl who broke her ankle was doing, but nobody wanted to ask the guy who was going through depression treatment how he was feeling, in spite of him being open about, hey, I'm going through treatment, I'm trying some new medication, I might need some help, but everybody was afraid, or they would whisper in corners about this topic. And so why is that? Why is it okay to talk about our physical health? It's okay to mention you have a headache, it's okay to mention you have a cold, but it's not okay to mention that you have paralyzing anxiety and you don't want to leave your chair. It's because there's an unfair stigma surrounding mental illness. Why does this exist? It's often invisible. It's not obvious. Nobody who knows me would guess ever that I have depression. I wear bright colors, I'm generally an optimistic person, I'm positive, I'm outgoing, I'm extroverted. Would never guess. It's often invisible. You just don't know, and that's harder to understand than somebody who has an obvious physical disability, such as missing a leg or something like that. There's a fear of the unknown, and I think in tech, this is especially a struggle. Technical professionals like to view things in a logical manner, but mental health issues don't seem logical, and this is something that I personally faced. I had a very close relationship for a while with somebody, and they were at one point a big part of my support system, and they had a very hard time handling the treatment of depression and anxiety, because for them, they were good at supporting me had I had a migraine or had a cold or something, because they could help me get medicine and seek kind of an immediate response, but this was a long journey, and it was hard, and it affected the relationship. And this person is a technologist and an engineer, and to an engineer, it can be very hard to understand, why can't you just feel happy? Why can't you just focus? Why can't you just stop worrying? Because I can't. That's like telling somebody with only one leg to just get up and walk. You can't do it. So it's unknown, and it's hard for us to understand as logical people. Discussing feelings is hard, it's icky, it's emotional, and it can be, again, a very uncomfortable topic because it's not always logical, and it's not always rational, and it's not always a nice, easy, linear process. And this is one I've been fortunate to not experience, but I know people who've had bullying and other issues early in their lives that have caused problems as well and kind of increased the stigma around mental illness. A lot of times we just don't understand what it is, or we think people who are mentally ill are broken. So because that stigma exists, we're afraid to discuss our mental health, and we don't realize we're doing ourselves a disservice. So how can we start overcoming the stigma? We need to understand. We need to understand why it is that sometimes people act how they do. So the coworker who was going through depression treatment, at one point he was late to the stand-up every single day. And it was to the point where the client was expressing concern about it, and it could have almost been a performance issue for him. Had we not known that he was going through treatment, he had come to us and said, hey, my new medication is having this impact on me. I'm having trouble getting up in the mornings. We should get through this in a little bit. But on the surface, people were perceiving this guy as just being lazy, a lazy post-college kid that was playing video games too late, when in reality, he was medically having trouble getting up in the mornings. So having that understanding kind of helped save his job and helped our team be a little bit more empathetic. Talking, if you're comfortable about this, talk about your own mental illness. If you know people who struggle, check in with them. This is something that it's still always a little uncomfortable to get up here and talk about this, but it's something that I've become comfortable talking about. I feel like as somebody who has multiple mental illnesses but is still successful, I don't want to say it's my duty, but it's something that if I'm capable of doing, I should get up and talk to people and talk about, hey, I have mental illnesses and I am successful in spite of this, and I live a good, fulfilling life in spite of this, and this is how I do it. Because that makes it easier for other people to talk about and for other people to have conversations. Listening, and this one's super key. I have several friends who also have mental illnesses, and the hard thing to remember, again, especially for engineers, is sometimes we don't want to solve the problem. Sometimes when you're having a bad depression day, you don't want to solve the problem, or you can't solve the problem. And we're not necessarily looking for a solution. You know the solution is you take your meds, you do your therapy, you do your coping mechanisms, whatever your doctor said to do. But it can be nice to have somebody to just listen and talk to you. And so I have several friends that I have these kind of agreements with where we check in on each other, and if one of us is having a bad day, the other will ask, are you looking for advice, or do you just want somebody to listen to you? And that's a thing that, fortunately, with a few of my friends, we kind of have this code. And more recently, a good friend of mine saw me for the first time in a kind of a depressed state when I went over and was hanging out with him. And he's like, well, and he's an engineer. And he's like, well, what do I do? Like, how can I help you through this? And I was like, that's the right question to ask. How can you help me? And I said, in this case, I'm in a funk. It'll pass. I just would like somebody to listen and just chill out with for a minute. And he was amazing and wonderful and just sat there with me, and we hung out for a few hours, and it was so much nicer than somebody telling me, well, you should go for a walk, you should go walk your dog, you should watch this funny video on YouTube. Like, sometimes that stuff doesn't work. So it's really, really important to listen to others and know what it is that they need at that time. And the other piece of the stigma is there's actually kind of legal and employment concerns, and I think a lot of this comes down to kind of knowing your legal rights about unemployment and about mental illness, especially in the workplace. So I'm going to touch on kind of disclosing your health issues at work. You are not legally required to disclose your disabilities unless they affect your ability to do your essential job duties. And this is all based on Americans with Disabilities ADA guidelines. So the ADA prohibits employers from discriminating against people who are disabled, and it requires your employer to provide you reasonable accommodations, which are modifications that allow you to do your job. So why might you disclose your health issues? Because you want this protection, you want this ADA protection. In my case, I let people know that I have depression because I if I wind up needing some of the accommodations for depression in the workplace, they know that, and they can accommodate that. But I mean, it's your privacy, right? Like this is giving up some private information about yourself, and especially if you're going into a new job or you don't know the person you're talking to very well, it can be an uncomfortable conversation. But you might need those accommodations. If you don't need accommodations, if you're treated well, if you're fine, you don't necessarily have to disclose these issues. The nice thing, though, about disclosing these issues is it does allow your employer or your team members to have some level of empathy for you and understanding. There's a fear of negative reactions. There's a fear of that stigma, and that's one reason that people sometimes choose not to disclose this stuff. But ultimately, even though I know I'm up here in this room, I know that I have coworkers and I'm on day 5 of a new job in this room, it's a big relief to at least get this out and just get this information out. It's a big stress reliever. It opens up conversations, and it's a lot easier than walking around with a secret that I feel like I have to hide. So when do you do this? You can do it during the interview process. It shows some honesty. It can open some conversations about overcoming adversity. It can be an effective thing to bring up in an interview. I generally recommend against it because even though it's highly illegal, there is a downside for discrimination, and you don't want to give a potential employer a reason that they could potentially think negatively about you. So the only time I really see this, I've seen this brought up during interviews in cases where somebody had to take time off work for a few months to take care of a health issue, but at that point they just left it like I had to take a few months off to take care of a health issue. As an interviewer, you should not ask any more questions. If the person volunteers that information, that's great, leave it at that. This is when I tend to bring this stuff up, as soon after starting a new job. I let my employer know kind of what it is that I deal with, and one thing that you run into actually is, for ADHD, I take Adderall. Adderall makes you test positive for amphetamines on a drug screen. So if I get a new job and have to take a drug screen, I get to tell my employer, hey, I'm going to test positive for amphetamines. This is why, if you want to see my prescription, you can. I've never had an employer go that far, but it's one of those things that it gets that uncomfortable conversation out of the way and opens the door for an additional conversation. What you don't want to do is wait until issues arise. And this is something I almost did. I almost got to a point where my depression was getting so bad that I'd been working with the company for 3.5 or so years, and it was getting to a point where it was affecting my job and my performance, and my boss was starting to be like, hey, what's going on? Do you even want this job? Do you want to be here? And I basically had to come clean and have a conversation with him, because I feel like if it had continued and I had not had that conversation with my boss, he wouldn't have kept me on board. That was a very real risk I was running, because on the surface, all he sees is performance issues. So don't wait until the problem gets so bad that you can't fix it. How do you disclose this? It's actually a pretty simple conversation. You say you have a mental condition, and you tell your employer how it affects your work, and you don't have to get terribly specific. Who do you need to tell this to? You definitely, if anything, at least want to tell your HR manager, because they can help you with benefits and they can help you with the legal aspects of this. If you need accommodations, let your supervisor know as well. There is a really good document out there by the University of Massachusetts Medical School that gives you multiple scripts and ways to bring this conversation up. So that might be a good thing for you all to check out if this is something that relates. So it's important to have your medical and legal and human resources people, all these people kind of helping take care of your mental health. And you absolutely, above all, should follow the advice that your professionals are giving you. Do what your doctor says, do what your therapist says. If it doesn't work, go back to doctor or therapist, discuss it, and kind of iterate on it. So follow that advice. But day to day, when we're struggling with health issues, sometimes we need somebody who's not a doctor or a therapist, and maybe a friend isn't available at the moment, or maybe we just don't necessarily want to fully open up yet. So these are some other resources you can go to on your own and kind of learn a little bit more about this stuff. There's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's a grassroots nonprofit that is aimed at basically raising awareness around mental illness and reducing the stigma. Mentalhealth.gov, and I did this talk in Canada, so the Canadian equivalent is the Mental Health Commission of Canada. They are your government websites with a surprisingly good number of resources. So they'll have high-level overviews of what the various mental illnesses are. They have legal information, they have information on employment, and the other thing they have is they have links to kind of crisis hotlines or places to find providers. But the group that I think is really really cool and doing really important work is open sourcing mental illness. Has anybody here heard of this group? Nobody. Okay, OSME. Cool group. So the guy who founded it is a web developer named Ed Finkler. Several years ago, he started doing talks about his struggles with depression in the workplace and realized there were a lot of people like him within the tech industry. And so that evolved from this guy doing this talk to a whole organization that has people who do teaching and talking on this. They have 3 books that they put out. One is for HR managers, or just managers, kind of team leads supporting people with mental illness. One is for employees struggling with mental illness, and the third is aimed at kind of family and friends. So they put out these books. They have podcasts, a lot of really good resources, and the cool thing about it is it's all technologists. So the people who run this organization think about illness the way that we think about it. It's a problem to be solved, but also allow for and account for kind of the human aspects of that problem. So really good group to check out. Their URL is osmehelp.org. Good stuff there. So by taking the time to diagnose and treat and discuss our mental illnesses, we actually can help fix some of those career-related problems that I was talking about. After I got my depression treatment and everything under control, after I got under the right medication and got kind of in a new routine, my productivity is better than it's ever been. I'm doing well at work, I'm doing well at home, I'm living a fulfilled life again. Things are just better in general. Morale is higher, I'm feeling better about myself, feeling a lot more hopeful than I was, this time a year ago. Things are just better, and so that manifests itself at work. It manifests me as a more productive person with a good morale, and that helps grow me professionally. I've been fortunate to have been offered an opportunity to completely transition from one career to another this week, and I think part of it is due to kind of a consistent, just people seeing my efforts out in the community doing this stuff with kind of increasing my productivity and keeping people's morale up. So this will grow your career. So regardless of whether we struggle with mental or physical illness, there are some things we can do in our daily lives to be happier and healthier overall. So we're going to talk about self-care, we're going to talk about fun, we're going to talk about family and friends and support systems and how important those are for keeping us through tough times. So self-care is extremely hard to define without using the words self or care. So it's basically nurturing provided by you. It's the little things you do that add happiness and relaxation and kindness to your life. And I'm going to kind of outlay some of the things that I do for my own self-care. Maybe some will resonate with you, maybe you find your own thing. So a little thing I do is always at the grocery store, I buy a bunch of flowers for like $10 at Kroger. And I always have fresh cut flowers on my kitchen table. It's a little thing, but I love walking past my kitchen table, seeing a bunch of bright flowers, especially in the winter when it's gray and cold out. I can look at my table and I can see flowers, and it gives me kind of a little smile and kind of makes my day a little bit happier. That's an example of kind self-care, so it's an action. There's also something called reflective self-care. So kind self-care, other examples are things like massages, maybe sleeping in. I know people who allow themselves so much time to play a video game or schedule regular manicures or whatever it is that you like to do. That's self-care, enjoying yourself. Reflective self-care is more like prayer, meditation, journaling. I'm a big journaler. For a while I used a pre-scripted journal called a diary for good and bad days. And that was really cool because it was a short little journal and it would give you prompts. What were the bad things that happened today? What were the good ones? And every single day you had to reflect on the bad and the good. And they would make you list the bad first, then the good. But it was a good little reminder that even on some of those lowest days, I could find something. And that something might be little, oh, my dog, was really cute and cuddled me. My lunch was really good, whatever. But it was something little to remind me that no day is completely 100% miserable. Saying no. This is a big piece of self-care. It's also one I struggle with because I want to do all of the things with all the people all the time. And I had to learn a long time ago that sometimes I have to say no because otherwise I overcommit and overstress myself and I get burnout on everything. And scheduling time for yourself is important. And I know it can be hard when we have jobs and lives and families, but find time here and there for yourself to do whatever it is that you enjoy to take care of yourself and keep yourself a little bit happier. Have fun. Adults take ourselves too seriously. We forget how important it is to have fun. We see kids have fun. We see teenagers have fun. we don't have enough fun. We're afraid to let go. We're afraid to give up our responsibilities, but it's important. And the fun things in life kind of help us remember why it is that we exist and what it is that we're working for, because we're not working just for the sake of work. We're working so that we can have lives outside of work and enjoy ourselves. So fun for me. I'm big about my hobbies. My life kind of revolves around soccer and board games. I have gotten to a point where I have gotten to know a number of people in tech who are also into soccer. And so we have a little geek tailgate that we run. And it's something that, honestly, this group kind of got me through. So last year I went through a lot of loss. I had, within a 5-month span, my husband left. It's going to sound like a country song. Husband left, dog died, lost my job, fractured my ribs, was rear-ended. In 5 months. The friends that I had made around soccer and board games are the things that got me through that, because I knew that no matter how crappy my week had been, I could at least go hang out with my tailgate friends and forget about things for a little bit and just enjoy life. Same thing, I could play a board game and just kind of engage my mind in something else other than the stuff I'm going through. And that got me through last year. Another thing I prioritize is vacations and travel. I have a travel habit. I enjoy traveling. And one problem we have in America is we don't use our vacation time as much as we should. I highly recommend you take your vacation time. If airplane travel isn't your thing, or if travel isn't your thing, take your vacation time and hang out at home and play a new video game, or explore things around town, or work in your garden, or do woodworking. Whatever it is you're into, take time away from work. Enjoy some leisure. And finally, laughter is so important. And there are little things I'll do sometimes when I need a laugh. I have certain Twitter accounts or Instagram feeds that I know I can go follow and I'll have something to giggle at. I'm big on these kind of corgis doing goofy things on Instagram kind of captions, or the dog rates Twitter feed. It's always something I can go to and it might make me giggle a little bit, and it doesn't fix a bad day, but it's a little kind of bright spot in a bad day. So have fun, enjoy yourself. Don't take yourself so seriously. Finally, accountability. Relationships matter so much. Relationships, your family, your friends, your coworkers. That is your support system, and that's what gets you through the tough times in life. They help you with goal setting and accountability. So when I started going through my depression treatment, and especially as we started playing with meds and stuff, I told a couple of my closer girlfriends what I was going through so that they could check in on me. Hey, are you taking your meds? Are you going to therapy? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And that helped me be more inclined to do those things. They support you. This is your support system in tough times. When you're going through a hard time, you reach out to people. And I'm fortunate in that I have a really big support system, and I have friends and family and community that I know I can reach out to. The better part is when we all get to celebrate and we get to have the happy times. And tying this kind of back into work, have friends at work. You want a friend at work that you can go to, that you can just talk to as a friend without judgment and talk about some of these problems. So in talking about our health, we need more transparency and we need more empathy. And the more we make it okay to discuss and prioritize caring for our health, the easier this all becomes for everybody. And sometimes during these discussions, it's not advice. It's not about advice. It's not about fixing the problem. Sometimes it's just about listening and being there for somebody. Ultimately, none of us exists in a bubble. None of us exists alone. We're parts of teams, we're parts of family, we're parts of relationships. And our physical and mental health, so it doesn't just affect us. It affects our friends, our families, and our coworkers. So please don't be afraid to take care of your own health. Help others do the same. Have conversations about this if you're comfortable doing so. The end result is a happier and healthier and more productive tech community. Thank you for my time. That is my dog, who was a bright spot in last year. She's an 8-month-old corgi. You can open this up for questions, and if people don't have questions now, I'll be around the rest of the day if you'd like to stop and chat. Thank you.